Okay, so in problem 2, we get into some manufacturer suggested retail price and some retailer and distributor margins. And this is kind of a tricky concept that always trips students up. So the manufacturer suggested retail price, the MSRP, is basically the manufacturer telling the retailer what price they think the retailer should charge. And that price that the manufacturer suggests to the retailer builds in a share or percentage, aka a margin. Remember, every time we talk about a margin, we're talking about a percentage. So that price builds in an allowance for the retailer to get some of the money. And that kind of implies that the retailer is going to sell it and then they're going to take a piece of it and they're going to give the rest of the money to the manufacturer. In actuality, that's not how it happens. In actuality, the manufacturer sells the product to whoever is the next channel partner, and then they're done usually. Every now and then, there'll be some different arrangements, like maybe they take it on commission, but most of the time, the manufacturer just sells their product at a set wholesale price to the next person in the chain. But they're always talking about this MSRP, even though no one ever really gets the MSRP. Like, that money is a theoretical, analytical concept. But it's a handy one, and it's one used very heavily throughout the industry, so you have to understand it. So the manufacturer is going to sell the product to the next channel partner, and then that channel partner has possession of the product. And then they will set a price, and they will sell it. So the retailer is going to pay the manufacturer the wholesale price. From the retailer's point of view, the wholesale price is, for the retailer, the cost of goods sold. For the manufacturer's point of view, the wholesale price is the manufacturer's price that they're going to use as a selling price. So when you're looking at these problems, you always got to remember which point of view you're supposed to have as you're doing the analysis. So once the retailer buys it, then the retailer is going to set a price on the product in their store. And that price is what the end consumer is going to pay. Usually the price in the store is going to be in the ballpark of what the manufacturer suggested it should be. And sometimes there will be rules about that. Sometimes as part of the selling agreement, retailers may have to agree to honor the manufacturer's suggested retail price. Often manufacturers would push for that kind of agreement because that allows them to advertise prices across a wide audience where multiple retailers, they need to have consistent prices across the different retailers. So sometimes they advocate for that. Sometimes that's part of the contract. Sometimes it's just very likely to be close to the manufacturer's suggested retail price because it's convenient for the retailer to use that pricing because the manufacturer's already done all the research. That the actual retail price is what really determines the actual profit the retailer makes. So in theory, the retailer would sell the product at the manufacturer's suggested retail price, and if the retailer sold all that product and wasn't left with any that nobody bought, the retailer sells it all, then and they will get the profit margin that was built in when the manufacturer suggested a retail price and put a profit margin on it. So this makes sense from the retailer's point of view because the retailer has to price a huge number of products, and individually analyzing every product that they have to price is too much. So having it already set up with a suggested price and a built-in suggested profit margin for the retailer makes that a lot easier for the retailer. I mean, the retailer may be pricing thousands of different products, and many of those products the retailer may not be an expert in, and the manufacturer is. So the manufacturer has done the research about what that would mean for the end consumer, what the end consumer is willing to pay when they set that price, and the retailer can just conveniently use the price that has been suggested. Sometimes retailers in particular industries have ideas about standard margins that they expect. That may vary from one type of store to another. A clothing store might expect a different profit margin than a grocery store. Notoriously low margin business. So it's normal that there would be some variation there, and they have an idea about their standard margin. So the manufacturer needs to understand that so that the manufacturer can budget for that. So it's very helpful from the manufacturer's point of view to use the MSRP as a analytical tool, even though the MSRP is what the retailer is theoretically going to charge the consumer. So that really technically does not affect the money that the manufacturer has coming in. So the MSRP helps the manufacturer keep in mind the needs of all the players and evaluating feasibility of their marketing decisions, whether it's going to make a profit and that sort of thing. They have to factor in what is the end consumer willing to pay, what is the retailer going to be willing to pay, what is the wholesaler going to be willing to pay. And that in turn has to be part of what the manufacturer is thinking about. So that's why we use that, even though it drives students crazy. So now let's go to our problem 2, which has some manufacturer and retailer margins in it. Okay, so this time VCI is our company, and they're thinking about distributing a film. So they've done some market research. Their initial investment in the film is going to be $150,000. They've estimated that the total possible market for the film, meaning the total number of potential buyers out there, would be about 100,000 buyers. Then we've got a label design, we've got a package design, we've got advertising, we have got the reproduction of the actual DVDs, and the manufacturer, the labels and packaging for the DVDs, and we have royalties going to the artists and people involved with the film. So those are all priced per 1,000 DVDs. Our suggested retail price is $20, and we have a retailer margin of 40%. Okay, so that means if the retailer is getting 40%, what's the other share? So that's pretty straightforward. If the retailer is getting 40%, then that means the manufacturer is getting 60% of this imagined $20 the retailer is going to charge. So that's simple. It's going to be 1 minus the retailer's margin will tell us what share the manufacturer is going to get of the suggested MSRP. Now the phrasing of manufacturer's margin is language I'm using to help you understand what's happening there. Normally we don't talk about a manufacturer's margin in this sense. But it's the share, it's the manufacturer's share of the suggested retail price. So what is going to be the wholesale price, aka what price is the manufacturer actually going to be charging the retailer in order to get this to work out? So that 60% is what the manufacturer is going to charge the retailer. So another way to look at it is the retailer is going to charge the end user $20, and of that $20, 40% is going to be the retailer's gross profit, and 60% is going to be the part that they give to the manufacturer. Okay, so that means our wholesale price is going to be 60% times our $20 suggested retail price. So the manufacturer is going to sell it to the retailer for $12, so that is the wholesale price. Now, the manufacturer is not going to sell it to the end user. So the manufacturer is never going to collect this $20. That's going to be on the retailer. The retailer is going to buy it from the manufacturer for $12, and then they're going to turn around and sell it to the consumer for $20. And that extra $8 is going to go into the retailer's pocket. So when we're doing the analysis from the manufacturer's point of view, which is our point of view in this problem, we're going to view this $12 as the price that actually matters to us for purposes of the contribution analysis. Okay, so we also need our fixed and variable costs before we can go on to the rest of the problem. So let's take a look here. Which of these costs are fixed and which are variable? Okay, so the investment is a fixed cost. That is not per unit. The cost of the distribution rights is also a fixed cost because that's not going to change no matter how many we sell. The label design fee is going to happen before we sold anything, so that's not going to change. It's fixed. The package design, same deal. It's fixed. The advertising is fixed. It's not going to be per per DVD. So then producing the actual copies of the DVD, that is a variable cost. Now in this case, our price is per 1,000, not per one, but it's still, this price can be clearly allocated, clearly related to the number that we are selling. So that is a variable cost. Likewise, all these things that say per 1,000 are variable costs. All right, now we're ready to do our problem down here. So our total fixed costs are going to be the sum of the ones we've labeled as fixed costs up here. Whoops. I don't want to include those estimated units. Okay, there's my fixed costs. And here, variable costs. So that, remember, these are per 1,000. So that we just calculated our $4,000 for reproduction, our $500 for the label and packaging, our royalties for $500. That's per 1,000 CDs. So our total variable cost for one CD is going to be $5,000 divided by 1,000 units will tell us on average our variable cost per unit is $5. Okay, that was our background numbers, and now we're ready to do more analysis. Okay, so our first question is VCI's unit contribution. So remember, our per unit contribution is always going to be our selling price minus our per unit variable cost. The only tricky part here is what price do we use, because we now have two different prices in the problem. We have the wholesale price and we have the suggested retail price. And notice that anytime you see in your business documents a suggested retail price and a stated retailer margin, that means you have two selling prices to think about, even if they don't lay all this out for you by calculating it in advance. So we're going to use this $12 wholesale price because that is what the manufacturer is going to be paid. So since we're the manufacturer here, we're going to use the manufacturer's price, which is the $12, minus the variable cost per unit, which is right here, our $5, and we get $7. So VCI, the manufacturer's contribution margin, again, that's just stating the per unit contribution in percentage form. So it's going to be for every CD we sell, we're going to have $7 left after covering our variable costs. And that $7 represents what percentage of the wholesale price? 58%. So for every CD we sell, 58% of that money goes to our other costs after we produce the CD. So that means our break-even point in units. So when it's asking for units, so that means we're going to use the per unit contribution whenever the answer is in units. So I'm going to take my fixed cost, because whenever you're breaking even, your financial goal is to cover your fixed costs. So fixed cost goes on the top of my fraction. So I'm going to take my total fixed cost and I'm going to divide that by my per unit contribution. And so I need to sell 46,000 and some. And to make it fancy, I can round that up since we're talking about units here. So 46,429 DVDs is what I need to sell to break even. So now the problem asks us for the break even point in dollars. So whenever it asks for dollars, that means that we're going to use the contribution margin. So again, my fixed costs are still my goal. Every time you're breaking even, your financial goal is to cover your fixed costs. So my fixed costs divided by my contribution margin. and this tells me the sales revenue I will have to generate in order to break even. So of course, we have two ways we could calculate here. So if we wanted to double check our work, we could say, how much sales revenue would we generate if we sold this number of units? So if we sold 46,429 units, our revenue would be price times the number of units sold. So it's going to be our wholesale price, using the wholesale price again because we're the manufacturer and that's the only price that's real to us. So our wholesale price times our number of units sold, and that would tell us that our revenue would be 557,000 and change. And notice that's pretty close to the exact answer. Now the reason it doesn't line up perfectly is because we rounded up to even units. So this one, it's not going to be possible for us to have exactly this because we would have to sell a partial DVD to get that number. Anyway, that's why the rounding doesn't work, but you can see that it's very close. Okay, so if we wanted to make a 20% ROI on this investment, what number would we be talking about here? This is a what if. We're going to calculate if our goal is to hit a 20% ROI. So the book and there's different approaches you can use. So I'm going to use here in this example, I'm going to include my fixed cost. So that's my total investment in the project. I'm doing my total fixed cost, which I already calculated as my investment. And I'm going to multiply that times 1.2. Now the reason I'm using 1.2 as my multiplier is because I want to make sure I cover that 325,000 of fixed cost, and then I want to make 20% additional. So to cover 100, that would be 100%, right? I want to cover 100% of my $325,000 in costs. And then on top of that, I want to make a 20% return. So it's going to be 1, aka 100% in decimal form is 1. So 20% in decimal form is 0.2. So it's 1 plus 0.2 is what I'm going to use. So that brings me to 390,000. So through getting 390,000, so it's always a good idea to look at the answer and the number and think about what this number means and does that number make sense. So we might think, what is this 390,000? Because we already said we're going to need 557,000 sales revenue to break even. And here we're saying 390,000 is going to be our ROI. Well, this is 390,000 is what we want to end up with as our, after our variable costs are already taken out, we want to have 390,000 left over. That is, we get our money back on our fixed costs and we have a 20% return. So this is not actually our total sales revenue. It's the financial goal number that we're going to use on the top of our equation. So then we're going to ask, how many units would it take for us to sell in order to end up with 390,000 left over after our variable costs? So we have to include our variable costs along with the number of units, because otherwise we have two unknowns. You can't calculate your total variable costs unless you know how many units. So that's why we have to set the problem up that way. So the 390,000 is our financial goal over and above the variable costs. And the variable costs are already taken care of in the problem because they're accounted for in our contribution. So that's the whole reason we're using the contribution like that. So we're looking at our financial goal is our fixed costs plus the profit we want to earn, and the variable costs will be included in the bottom half of our equation in our contribution analysis. How many units do I need to sell to achieve that? Well, now that we've calculated that, this becomes our financial goal of what we wanted to achieve. Financial goal goes on the top of our fraction in our contribution analysis. So I'm going to take my financial goal that I just calculated divided by my per unit contribution. This tells me that I would need to sell 55,714 units. So let me clean up my formatting here. Again, just making it fancy, rounding up to an even number of units since we can't sell part of a DVD. So I need to sell 55,715 units. And what percentage of the total market does that represent? So this is a very common question a marketer might want to ask, because you'd like to know if it's even possible to achieve a 20% ROI, right? So let's check. So 55,000, almost 56,000 is what we need to sell. And our market researchers have estimated that the total number of possible DVDs we could sell once everybody buys it is 100,000 units. So what percentage of that total possible market will we have to sell to get our 20% ROI? It's going to be the number that we think we need to sell divided by the 100,000 units we estimate as the market size. And that tells us that we would have to get 56% of the potential buyers to buy it before we would see A. And that is problem 2.